So I wonder if in thinking about values, you thought about the value of history. This building, this old home belonging to Moses Thompson and his family, is now the home to the Center County Historical Society, one of many societies around the country that are devoted to local history. These are dependent on volunteer efforts and donations. I urge you to come here sometime. It's just down the street from Beaver Stadium. Come here sometime and see the exhibits and consider supporting your own local historical society. I hope by this time you started to wonder what all this has to do with climate change. After all, there aren't iron furnaces here anymore, just not running. We've got plenty of trees. What does this have to do with us and our situation? Well, actually, it's connected quite intimately. And there's a reason why Richard Alley begins his book thinking about 18th and 19th century energy usage, like charcoal and whale oil. He argues that human beings are essentially energy users. Now, we're lazy. We like to make other things do our job for us. Well, that's a kind of value, isn't it? Without going into whether that's true or not, the fact is that climate change and the solutions to climate change, many of them are energy issues. We are going to eventually run out of fossil fuels. It will take generations to do so, probably centuries. But at some point, sooner or later, if human civilization is to continue on another 10,000 years, we'll have to find other energy sources. Richard Alley argues we should do that now, before we change the atmosphere of this planet. And so that's the issue. Our fossil fuel use changes the atmosphere of the planet. How? By literally burning fossils. So one of the most important things to understand is that modern production of iron doesn't use charcoal, it uses coal, or a product called coke made from coal. Coal is a fossil, is the fossilized remains of woody plants that then 300 or 350 million years ago were compressed into what we now call coal. Those plants took carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and then that heat and pressure over time created a carbon product that will burn. In other words, when we burn coal, we're putting ancient carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Those woody plants that then turned into coal, the oily plants that turned into oil, the little creatures that created their shells that made limestone, all of these sequestered carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, beginning from the Cambrian explosion of 500 million years ago, and then running for hundreds of millions of years, an incredibly long period of time when slowly, carbon dioxide is being taken out of the atmosphere, and importantly for us, oxygen is being put in. We couldn't live today in the atmosphere that those plants and animals lived back then. The Precambrian period had an atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide, probably around 5,000 parts per million. Currently, we're at about 415, 420 parts per million, so a tenth of what the carbon dioxide was back then. Thinking about that long-term process, hundreds of millions of years to sequester that carbon dioxide, now all being put into the atmosphere very quickly, tells you that burning fossil fuels is part of a long-term carbon cycle. Very different from the burning of trees. When you take a tree and you turn it into charcoal and you burn it, you're putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere that was only maybe 100, 200 years ago in the atmosphere before. And then trees will take that carbon dioxide and sequester it again, and then you can burn it, and that's a short-term carbon cycle. An even shorter-term carbon cycle is me. I am talking to you, my body is being run because of the oxygen that I am extracting from the atmosphere. Oxygen that in some ways comes from these trees around me. I breathe out carbon dioxide, which the trees then use together with water and the power of the sun to photosynthesize glucose. That's a short-term carbon cycle. Very short in the case of my maybe 70, 80-year life. A little longer for a tree, 200, maybe 500 years at most, unless you're talking about a bristlecone pine, but that's something else. But even for a bristlecone pine of 2,000 years old, that is nothing compared to 350 million years old coal that we burn as part of a long-term carbon cycle. So thinking about these long-term and short-term carbon cycles is really important, because we can't depend on trees to sequester the carbon dioxide that we're putting into the atmosphere from burning coal and oil and natural gas. Trees will never be able to sequester that much carbon within a period of time that's meaningful to us. And the same thing goes for marine creatures that create shells and that sequester carbon in calcium carbonate, CaCO3, which is another form of carbon being sequestered, which is itself the limestone that goes into the production of iron. So in this way, even the iron furnaces of the 19th century were participating in a long-term carbon cycle. It will take hundreds of millions of years to produce new limestone. It will take hundreds of millions of years to produce new coal. And because of that, the carbon dioxide that we put in the atmosphere now from burning coal stays in the atmosphere for an extremely long time. So I want to make sure that you really understand the difference between long-term and short-term carbon cycles, that you can fluently talk about the difference between coal and charcoal. I suggest that you start to draw these things out, these cycles, and to see the interaction of all these different things together. Because we are all connected to these cycles, and we are the ones who are engaging in an experiment to change the makeup of our atmosphere to a kind of atmosphere that human civilization has never known.